Wow.
All right, so no more stupid music talk.
Yeah, that's right. Back to our precepts.
Right. Our precepts?
Or
is that like the other
postceps.
side of your bicep?
Yeah, basically. Yeah, no, Socrates.
Socrates. Yep.
Yeah, I'm excited.
So I haven't read any Socrates stuff since I was in high school.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. I
How
read
come?
not all of the Republic, but I read like a chunk of it.
Yeah, no, it's so we're going to talk about the Apology today. Yeah, we're off of music. That was we'll probably come back to it at some point and do. Yeah, maybe. We'll keep it vague.
Right.
And plausibly deniable.
AMX.
But yeah, AMX. But yeah, no, I mean, I wanted to talk about this one in particular just because, I've yeah, I don't want to give too much away, but I do feel like, what we're doing is in the spirit of that.
And I kind of imagine we're probably going to be in front of a bunch of judges pretty soon ourselves.
I think so too. And given the fact that the Peloponnesian War just ended and there's an oligarchy that was just, established and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not looking good.
No, not looking good for us, but it's okay. But yeah, no, I mean, I don't know. I like this one a lot. Just, I mean, yeah, but he is a silly character. And, I was just reading a little bit of background on Socrates and stuff. And, because basically, right, everything we know about Socrates is all through the translation or transcription, if you will, as a callback of Plato and Xenophon, I think. So two students. And people don't really read Xenophon. He's kind of cast to the wayside. But, there's all this, obviously, controversy about who is Socrates actually, and is he actually the person that's depicted? Right. Because we're getting Plato's, in at least most people's conception, it's all Plato's ideas of what Socrates was, and even the Xenophon Socrates is a little bit less ironic and sort of playful,
right?
But also Xenophon was like a warrior and stuff, so he's probably very stern anyway. Right. So yeah, I don't know. It's just interesting because it makes you wonder how much of it, and of course, Plato's writing a lot of this after the fact, so you have to almost assume that there's embellishment and everything like that.
True. It would be more impressive if he wrote it before the fact.
That's right. As a precept.
So, a side question before we get going. An old argument I used to hear a lot when I listened to a lot of atheist thinkers. People would argue about, well, maybe Socrates didn't exist, or there's more evidence that Jesus existed than Socrates or something. And the atheist argument was always that it doesn't even matter if Socrates existed. There's nothing hinging on whether or not he was a real person.
Right. Oh, I see. Well, I don't understand why atheists would make that argument. Oh, because they say Socrates is a good moral guide that you can have without.
No. It's usually Christians who would make that argument.
That Socrates
like
is a
you
good moral
guys
guide.
like Socrates.
I see, yes. Right.
And there's less evidence that he existed.
Right.
And the atheist argument is always that it doesn't matter whether or not he existed.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just an interesting history that I have with Socrates. But yeah, I mean, I guess I sort of agree. I feel like a lot of very old history I don't take particularly seriously in terms of sort of actually happening. It doesn't really matter to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in many ways it doesn't. Just, thinking of like Homer and the Odyssey and everything like that.
I mean, even what we read today, it strikes me as highly unlikely that this is some kind of historical document. Yeah.
Although there are interesting corroborations with history in it, like all the references to... But you're right. I mean, yes, as we've already said, I'm sure there's a lot of embellishment and theatrical aspects that Plato added, which is probably why Plato's writings have survived for, 2,000 plus years. And yeah, because I mean, so Socrates was born like somewhere around like 470 BCE, I think. and then he died in like 399 BCE. And he lived in an interesting era because he basically saw the height of Athenian democracy,
right,
and then the fall of it after the Peloponnesian War,
right,
and Sparta basically installed an oligarchy, the tyrannical 30. There were two oligarchies actually that were installed. There was like a rule of like 400, and then there was a rule of 30. And the rule of 30 was the most recent one that they were talking about in like 404 BCE. And the 400 one was like 411 BCE. And basically these were, it was also interesting to think, we talked about how democracy can sort of succumb to oligarchy. And then it was also interesting because it was brought up in the case of Socrates' apology because of, just showing how he has moral, he won't go along with the crowd essentially because they were trying to get him to execute somebody and stuff. But, to that point is there's a lot of interesting history around here, and actually to contextualize his death, even when I was reading about it, some people look at it as like, he was obviously annoying, but there's also like, because he survived during the oligarchy and he stayed in Athens during the time that the oligarchs took over. And during this time, it was very, very bad. Like, I guess 5% of the Athenian population was killed and just a lot of barbarism was occurring. People started to associate him with this because, it was this question of how did he survive? And one of his accusers was actually like his son died during that reign. And, this was just somebody on Wikipedia basically saying that was a potential sort of reason that, what was his name? Lyson? I can't remember. It's the L name.
Right.
Because you have Melodus, who's like the main person that talks. You have three main accusers.
Right.
There's an A name. I just suck at Greek, so I don't even want to try to pronounce it. But there's a name that starts with an A, then there's Melodus, and then there's a name that starts with L. Nice. And basically they're accusing Socrates of corrupting the youth and not believing in God. And that's basically what he spends the chapters talking about, among other things, like how he came about doing his thing and why he's not going to run away and why he's going to speak the way he does. But it's just interesting, again, that, with all of these things, there's obviously greater context that can be added. And to that point of whether Socrates was a real person, I agree it doesn't really matter, but I don't know, it just also feels like, it actually feels like there's more evidence that Socrates was a person than Jesus in some ways.
Well,
but dare I say.
The Christian claim is that there's more documents talking about Jesus than any other figure, like in the history of the world kind of a thing.
True. Primary documents, I guess, aren't there only... Well, yeah, there's how many Gospels?
There's 4 Gospels. There's
4 main
Book
ones,
of Acts.
right?
There's a whole bunch of epistles. It's like 40 books.
So those are all the primary sources?
I guess. I don't know.
I mean, that's not bad. It's true. I mean, you have Xenophon and Plato for here.
Right.
But you have a lot from Plato. That's the other interesting thing. When you read, it's like when you look at his complete works, which I have here, it's like, it's like 1,500 pages.
Right.
Not saying the Bible isn't big, but that's not all about Jesus,
Right.
I don't know if you know that, Antushka.
Well, the Christians would say it is all about Jesus. But.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Well, it's not all the primary source of Jesus.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of the point but it's true. I mean, I see what the point is. There's corroborating evidence for Jesus and everything like that.
Well, it just made me think of it because the translation I was reading, before the apology, the translator has a note where he suggests that he thinks that it is actually a true dialogue, that it's sort of a historically accurate dialogue, that Socrates probably did actually say this.
Yeah, maybe. And I mean, he was apparently tried in front of like 500 Athenians.
Right.
So there were a lot of people there. And again, it's like...
And they all wrote it down exactly the same without a word difference.
Exactly. Yeah. But I mean... I will say, because I'm not about to get into this. I shouldn't throw my hat into is Socrates real, is Jesus real argument, because I don't really care. You know what I mean? It's like I have no dog in that fight, and there's people who feel much more strongly about it. I think it's just interesting just to think of how, also just like some of the Jesus characteristics you can see in him, which
I
makes
agree.
sense because of the Hellenization of the Roman Empire. You know, the Greeks were very much influential on how everybody that was under the auspices of the Romans were thinking.
Yep.
And which I guess is where Gnosticism and all that stuff comes from.
Those Gnostics.
Those Gnostics. Yeah. But anyway, I don't know. I mean, so I guess the summary is, we already kind of did the summary that he is on trial for corrupting the youth and for not believing in God. And he speaks about that. So I guess we could just go into it unless you have any other points to make before.
I think that was about it. That he was a bad guy because he corrupted the youth and didn't believe in God. I have a list of kind of laying out his main rebuttals to those. I actually was not particularly impressed with him. Not that I think that these are reasons to put anybody to death. I think that the entire premise, the entire scene I'm imagining is truly ridiculous.
Well, yeah, and he even talks about how, it's like we are such silly children. He says that like before he dies. Because it's true. It's silly.
It is very silly. I kind of got Trump vibes from him.
Well, he is a gadfly, as he says, and I guess you could say Trump is a gadfly, somebody that sort of pushes against the social
It's sort of the
order.
way he would make arguments about, like, I'm great, everybody says I'm great.
Right.
I just asked my cousin, he says I'm the best ever.
Yeah. And then at the end, he's talking about how, you guys will all, like Socrates' revenge. I have it labeled at the end here, where he's basically making a prophecy that, and he's right in many ways that, what does he say? He says how, essentially, by killing him, the great Socrates, as he says, you will have more critics whom up till now I have restrained without your knowing it, and being younger, they will be harsher to you and will cause you more annoyance.
Yeah.
The best and easiest way is not to stop the mouths of others, but to make yourselves as good men as you can. This is my last message to you who voted for my condemnation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that last bit is really the key and the most important thing to talk about is the question of acting in a virtuous way or succumbing to what others want you to do or think is the right thing to do or something like that.
Right.
But maybe I'm wrong. So here's where I thought I wasn't very impressed with him. So, and I feel like you might correct me on some of these things.
I don't know.
In his refutation of the accusations, where he says, Socrates is a bad influence on children or corrupting the youth or something like that, I had as his main refutation that Meletus doesn't care about the youth. He's pretending to care about the youth.
That
like how can you claim that I'm corrupting the youth when you don't care about the youth in the first place?
I think it was. I think his central argument was more that he's not teaching anybody, because that's where the corruption would come from. It's from like him teaching. Because his central argument is that he has no wisdom, and any wisdom he has is from knowing that he has no wisdom.
This was another question. I wanted to know what they meant by wisdom, because it seemed like they kept talking about knowledge, like what I think of as knowledge, because he talks about artisans and people who make things. They have great wisdom when it comes to making things. It seems like he's talking about knowledge, and I would say in modern English we kind of separate knowledge and wisdom, at least somewhat.
Yeah, no, I mean, I get, because this is actually one of my favorite parts in the beginning, where he's laying out the people that have issues with him, and he went to the politicians and he asked the politicians about things, and they told him all sorts of things, but then when they would try to expand outside of that domain, he found out they were idiots, and then he went to the poets, and then he went to the craftsmen. It was the same thing. And so each one of his accusers is represented by one of these people too. Like, So I took it as, wisdom being extrapolating, I guess, outside into other domains of I guess you could say your primary knowledge. But again, I think he probably has a whole,
Right.
has a whole dialogue on wisdom.
I'm sure.
And in this case, I see what your point is, but I'm taking it as the idea of sort of assuming that you know more about things because you're really good at something, at one thing, which I think we all are guilty of. I mean,
right,
sure.
except Socrates.
Except for Socrates, yeah.
He does claim that he's the one human being on Earth.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
He
doesn't say Earth, but I think his point is that he's the only one.
Well, he says that, because of that, the god of Delphi, right? And he talks about his friend Sephirophon.
Yeah,
Chaerephon, something like that. Okay, Chaerephon. And he talks about how this person could corroborate, even though this person's dead. His son could potentially corroborate that. Yeah, from a young age. People are saying that I was spoken to by the god of Delphi, that I am the only one that has wisdom because I know that I have no wisdom. But yes, I agree. I mean, it's quite... Yeah, I mean, this is why he was annoying. There's no doubt about that. It's like... No doubt about that. I mean, honestly, we should read Nietzsche's take on Socrates at some point, because Nietzsche did not like Socrates.
Nice.
There's a whole thing about that. Yeah, whereas I'm quite conscious of my ignorance. So at any rate, it seems that I am wiser than he is to this small extent, and that I do not think that I know what I do not know.
Right.
So I have like the meat of his sort of argument, I think, is right here in the beginning of the apology at like 23, around 23. The stanza lines or whatever. But the truth of the matter, gentlemen, is pretty certainly this, that real wisdom is the property of God, and this oracle is his way of telling us that human wisdom has little or no value.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So I think it's just that, is that wisdom is only known by God. And I think, he makes reference to the oracle a few times, which is really his demon, which is the thing, his conscience, as I think about it, right? The thing that never tells him what to do, but tells him what not to do.
Right.
So, I mean, getting back to your question about the argument for the children, because, he sort of is taking him through, obviously, Socratically,
but I think doing a bad job.
Well, yes, sure. I think
actually maybe it has to do with a thought that I just had was his little his nuggets of sort of wisdom, I guess we could call it that, or his broad philosophical points, I think, are very powerful and interesting, and I think that his refutations of the accusations are kind of stupid. But I think it's possible that the accusations are kind of stupid on their face to begin with. And so it's kind of difficult to argue against such a ridiculous claim as you're corrupting the youth. Because what even is the refutation to that? What does that mean in the first place?
That's exactly what his point is, though, is when he's doing it. He's saying, who knows how to make a good person?
Right.
And, and that's why he's using, like, the example of the horse trainer, and because honestly, the answer is like nobody really knows, right? And because then Melodus is making the point of, well, it's like it's the teachers or it's also everybody, and he's just basically just showing the illogical aspects of his argument, in my opinion.
Right. And I think it was similar with the disbelief in God.
Yes.
He had some weird circular thing where it's like, by you saying that I don't believe in God, you're actually saying that I do believe in God, kind of a thing.
That I thought was actually a very good point, though. He said, like, what person would believe in the activities of God and not believe in a God? In my translation, they're using, like, supernatural. would anybody believe in supernatural activities and not actually believe in the supernatural?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it's kind of a weird line because people can believe in any manner of things, and I feel like there is no way to prove what you do and don't believe. Mm-hmm. If somebody doesn't believe you don't believe something, I don't know.
Right, exactly. Well, and yeah, again, and I think just because like in this, he explicitly gets Mellitus into a circular argument to contradict himself, saying like he believes in a god, but he also doesn't believe in any gods. Mm-hmm. And you know, that was, I think, the point of that. Right. But yeah, I mean, he also at the end is making the point that, you know, if he had more than a day, he could have potentially done better. But it's also like I don't know how much he was also trying to defend himself, because and actually some of the most profound aspects of this, in my opinion, are his sort of philosophy of death, which goes into his philosophy of wisdom, which is like it's kind of stupid to be afraid of death, because that's the same thing as extrapolating wisdom outside of things that you just can't know about.
I highlighted that section about fear of death. I want to see if I can find it.
Oh, I've got it right here. Oh, I've got one of them here, 29. For let me tell you, gentlemen, that to be afraid of death is only another form of thinking that one is wise when one is not.
Right.
It is to think that one knows what one does not know. Mm-hmm. I like that.
Yeah.
That not possessing any real knowledge of what comes after death, I'm also conscious that I do not possess it.
Right. Oh, yes. And this made me think of another thing that's interesting, because it doesn't seem at this time that they have a conception of hell as in like Dante's version of hell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so then I was also thinking that there's something kind of politically expedient about Dante's version of hell for Catholicism and various forms of Christianity, because having people like terrified of death to that extent is a great way to control them in this life.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I've looked at Catholicism, honestly, or Christianity. It's been a control mechanism that came out of the Roman Empire as it was falling. Yeah. So nice. I absolutely agree.
We should have some Christians on and talk to them. I love this idea.
Yeah. Well, you know, I don't know.
Well, I think hell especially is a fascinating idea to me, because there is not at least the ancient Jewish religion doesn't have that conception of hell. Mm-hmm. But Islam does. Islam has burning hellfire a la Dante, same kind of stuff.
And that was always baked into it, or was that also something that came later?
I believe there's verses about it in the Quran, about what will happen to the non-believers.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot of interesting things with that. I mean, even just, he's talking about, what is it? I can't,
Right, he presents two options for what's going to happen when you die.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, either it's going to be nothing and you're just dead, and that's like preferable even to living, according to him.
I know, it's a game.
Right.
Or you see all
get
your
to
friends.
hang out with all the cool people who died before you.
Yeah, exactly. Like Homer.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's true.
I mean, I like that those are the only two options. Again, we're down to two. It's so unimaginative. It could be anything.
It could be. I mean, there's a lot of... I was just going to say, he's quoting Anaxagoras, because, you know, this is during the time where he's refuting Mellitus about believing in gods. It's like, you surprised me, Mellitus. What is your object in saying that I don't believe in gods? Do you suggest that I do not believe that the sun and moon are gods, as is the general belief of all mankind? And then he certainly does not, gentlemen of the jury, since he says that the sun is a stone and the moon a mass of earth. That's his Meletus' reply, which is interesting because like, then Socrates is like, do you imagine that you're prosecuting Anaxagoras, my dear Meletus? And so it's just, that was a very small, not really essential part, but I thought it was interesting that it sort of emphasizes how we've had ideas about what the sun and moon were for a long time.
Right.
We
like to think that it wasn't until like Copernicus and stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, even in Plato is talking about, I mean, some of the biggest, I don't know if you want to say corroborating evidence for Atlantis, but certainly Plato ends up talking about Atlantis as a thing that existed, past the Strait of Gibraltar or whatever. Which is, I think, where a lot of people think that there could have been some sort of civilization that existed, like, in the Anunnaki, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway. Let's see.
So, I'm curious about your thoughts on the idea of holding to your virtues all the way to death. Because I think we've talked about this idea directly and indirectly multiple times on the podcast. I think it's a challenging idea because it's sort of scary. And we don't. I mean, I don't really know that many people who hold that strongly to that. I mean, we probably each have things that we've done based on the principle of the matter, and there's things that we let go because it's sort of expedient for some reason, even if it goes against our principles.
I think.
So, what do you think about it as sort of a pinnacle of virtue?
Well, I think it is admirable, but I think it's what Socrates is doing is slightly different than what most of us do, because his central virtue is that he knows nothing, whereas most people, when they're holding on to virtues, is saying that they know that this is the thing, And you could say that there's a contradiction, but I think that actually, it's like the more I think about reality, the more I feel like if you start to hone in on the paradoxes, then you're sort of butting up against the scaffolds of reality, which is why I think his philosophy is so powerful. Because I mean, it's just, I think holding the virtue that you are always going to be ignorant is a very good one to hold, and potentially the most important one. And that's why I like the apology so much. And I don't know if it's evidence from this podcast of how I talk, but I think that is a central virtue for me. If I had any, it's probably that I constantly think that I'm an idiot.
Nice.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree that his central point is that he doesn't know anything.
Well, it's his central virtue.
Right. Sure. His central virtue.
Or his keystone.
But there's other important virtues that I think stem from that inform his decision making, like when he decides to go home instead of going to arrest the guy to be put to death.
Yeah, and that virtue is his oracle, I would say. Which, but I would say those are sort of secondary.
Right, but the decision to follow your own moral compass at the potentially toward the detriment of yourself. Because he even talks about how he could have been arrested for that. And maybe should have been.
Yeah, it's a good question, because it's like, then this is where Socrates, the man, becomes a more complicated picture. Because I think that it's very admirable to do that at his stage. It's admirable to do that at any stage. But there's something to be said about not doing it earlier in your life as much.
Right.
Because, I mean, he was able to get to the age of 70, I'm sure, because he wasn't actually living this way.
Well, he talks about that early on, where he doesn't or hasn't spent much time engaging in political discourse and with politicians. His conscience is telling him not to, probably because by doing so, he would find himself in the kind of trouble that would not allow him to live out his life.
Yeah, no, I mean,
like
yes, no, it's. I think in principle it's great. In practice, it's difficult. But I think that we all, I certainly try to do it to the extent that I can. But yeah, I mean, you already know I have opinions about things that I just withhold from the public sphere because I know it's not really worth the hassle at this point. But at some point it will be. It's just depending on when that will be, I guess, is the question. Because that's, I guess, what my point is.
Probably not. There's probably always going to be opinions that you hold that won't be worth the hassle.
Maybe, but maybe not.
Because I have a hard time imagining somebody completely free.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that that's what Socrates is, but yeah, at the same time, you
Socrates
could also...
maybe, but he's the one. He already said it.
Right. Well, and I think we can all agree Socrates is basically just autistic.
Kind
of. Yeah, because it is there's a sense of not conforming to social norms too, right? Of holding your tongue. Like that's kind of what you're doing when you're speaking your mind when in a setting where maybe you should hold your tongue.
Right.
And it's a question of...
And what does should mean?
Well, and that's and also what is it as virtuous if you literally just can't hold your tongue? Right. You know what I mean?
No.
If you no, it's not, I would say.
It's the same thing about how being nonviolent because you're scared is not the same as choosing to be nonviolent even if you have the capacity to.
Right.
One is cowardice and one is strength.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, but, I mean, and I was just going to say, it's like, my conception would be Socrates wasn't living this fully when he was like, for instance, my age.
Right.
The ripe age.
He was pretending he knew things he didn't know.
Yeah, I think probably. But we just don't know that person because that is lost in history because that was like 440 BCE. He fought in the Peloponnesian War, supposedly. So, I imagine that he was a much different man than if he, assuming that he was actually a person, right?
Right.
And yeah, it's just, you look at people, especially in this age, and there is something admirable about somebody that just goes online and puts everything out there, right? And I think that people do flock to that. I mean, Andrew Schultz talks about this, the comedian, of like people kind of want to see you walk through fire as like a test. And if you do it and you come out, then you'll have a lot more people supporting you. And but I think there is a timing to that.
Yes.
And it just depends on, I mean, that's the problem though, is because, it's like Socrates is probably okay with dying at this point in his life because he already has he's basically gotten out all of his thoughts, most of them, all the thoughts that he feels like he needs to. He's been doing this for decades. Right. Just, messing with people. He's got kids, Yeah. And I mean, so it's admirable, but it is a little bit less admirable than if he was like a 31-year-old and doing it, in my opinion, honestly. Right. Because you just...
So, point one, Jesus.
Yeah, I guess so.
They do seem really similar to me. That was the other thing is I was listening to him, and the way that he's challenging feels very...
Jesus-like.
Messianic.
Yes. No, I agree completely. Yes. Yeah. Well, and it's this other point. That's why I brought up all the historical context, because, I mean, certainly the historical context of Jesus is very important. The occupation by the Romans of Judea and everything like that is why you had, and I mean, this is what Reza Aslan writes about in Zealot, his book, of just you had a lot of Messianic people. It's just Jesus was, for whatever reason, the most popular that sort of had staying power. Right. For whatever reason. I guess some might say it's because he's God.
Because he was onto the right, because he was God. It's quite a reason.
Yeah, man, we are just hellfire today. But this, and I guess the point I'm making though is like Socrates again was coming at this. I mean, it was a really hard time in Athens. They were just like they were just defeated by Sparta. I mean, within the last decade, and then you had essentially the government collapsed twice.
Right.
And so there was probably a lot of uncertainty and a lot of fear. And it's in those periods that I think you find people like this. You find the Messianic people will rise up because people are maybe looking for that too. They're looking for guidance in the chaos.
Right.
And yeah, so I agree completely that there's a lot of similarities. And this is, I think there's absolutely was influence of the Greeks. I mean, again, this is why they call it Hellenism of Rome,
Right.
Yeah. I mean, and yeah, sorry, I'll just, and just again, Aristotle was the court philosopher of Alexander the Great of Macedonia that came in, the early 300 BCE. So like a generation or two after Socrates died, took over everything but spread the learning of the Greeks. So, yeah, sorry.
What?
Sorry.
Yeah, you should be.
Sorry.
We're talking on a podcast.
No, but what were you going to say? I keep interrupting.
Well, I think I was. I'm pushing the point a little further about acting according to your principles or what you feel is virtuous, because we had a conversation like 5 or 8 episodes ago or something about should people act according to their own moral compass. Mm-hmm. And I think we landed somewhere different on that, because it's not that I agree with everybody's moral compass, but I think that personally, I would say the best situation is everybody acting according to their own moral compass, rather than submitting to like random other people's moral compasses or some weird group moral compass. And to me, this text can be lifted from the text that we read this week, the Apology, can be lifted from the historical context almost entirely to be a narrative about just that, about the sort of the tyranny of the majority versus the individual personal moral compass. And Socrates is resisting, and he's saying, no, I will not bend. It's interesting, vis-a-vis the Rose Wilder Lane readings about how, like, you cannot be made to act, you cannot be a slave kind of a thing.
Yeah.
If you do not give the consent of your will, and essentially that's what Socrates is doing and saying.
Right. Yeah, no, the reason I think, if I remember, because I think I was coming off on more of the point that it's complicated.
Yeah.
And the reason is because it's like your moral compass isn't even only to you. I mean, it's like your moral compass is shaped by your community, your interactions, what you read. It's like even though you're not taking stock of all that is being aggregated by your brain to make the moral compass that you have, and which is why it changes over time too. So that's why I think it's tricky, because it's like, but you know what? I do think, and that's also why I feel like maybe I only agree with that idea when the moral compass is that you accept that you're an idiot, because it's because
nice.
Yes. Because as soon as you start thinking that you know the way, that's when you get the evangelism, and then that's when you get the tyranny.
Nice.
Yes.
I like that little caveat. You should follow your own moral compass, providing that you know that you don't know anything.
Exactly, because then you're at least going to be careful. And I feel like that's the big thing that Socrates gets at, and that's why I like this so much, and that's why it's been so influential on me, because I really do try to live that. And especially in the field that I'm in, it's full of people that think they know everything, and it's true. As you can push up against any expert to find the limits of their knowledge, and some people, the honest ones, will admit it, but the dishonest ones will will sort of just, they won't, and then they'll also confabulate and stuff like that.
Right. But this is it actually, and then it becomes difficult to argue with them.
Mm-hmm. Or they'll probably cocoon themselves in jargon.
Right.
Is what I think most people do.
A funny side story. I saw this. I don't know if you happened to see it on Reddit. I think I made a silly comment on it. But somebody asked AI, like Google one or something like that. This is a music theory nerd question, by the way, just as a warning. What's the flat 7 of E? So the answer is D. Mm-hmm. Right? Definitely. Anybody who knows music, it's D. D sharp is major 7, D natural, flat 7. It had this crazy argument about how it was B flat. And it was using, really jargony terms. It was like, well, what you have to do is you have to take into account the harmonic minor of E, which would have D sharp in it, and then D sharp would have a triad, G sharp, G sharp, blah, 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 which would be respelled as B flat. And nothing it was saying was right. It wasn't even naming chords right, but it had this incredibly complex jargony answer, which you might think made sense if you didn't know any music theory. And it was the weirdest thing. And the person corrected it, and then it started to get all snippy. And it was like, well, I think you need to do more reading, and it suggested these texts and stuff like that. It was
sounds
really
like me
weird.
when I was telling you to do more reading.
But the jargon, it's exactly what you're saying.
Yep,
it couched itself in jargon when it was just flat out wrong.
Yes. And I see that all the time in my field, and I think every field. And I think that's a lot of what he's pushing back against. Right. And I think is the most powerful argument about that I think you can get from Plato's writings is the idea of accepting that the limits of your own understandings and constantly questioning. It's like, do I really know this is the right path? And I think if more people did that, I do like to, because I think the opposite to that would be like, well, you have to have confidence in certain things or else nothing's going to get done. But it's not saying that you can't be sure about things after you have really thought about them, which is the purpose of the Socratic dialogue, I guess, in this point, is you sort of reason through things to try to get to what the beliefs are. And in some cases, when you do that, you will find out that there really is no answer, like in the case of justice, right? And whatnot. So then how do you feel then? Because you were pushing up, you posed it to me about I guess you still feel that everybody should act on their own virtue, but
I think that acting according, I don't know, because I don't know what the value of virtue is, because I don't live a life where I believe that I am trying to please a god or any group of gods. So I don't.
Sure you don't.
Sure I don't. I don't live with that as a principle, and so I struggle between sort of the hedonism of doing what's practical to stay alive or to thrive or whatever, and the sense that I have that it's important to do what's virtuous.
Yeah. Well,
and so if I can, be dishonest and make a little bit more money or something like that, I don't think that's a good thing to do. I personally feel like being dishonest is a really, really negative thing to do. Not that I don't engage in it, but I just don't think it's a good. It doesn't feel like it's good for me. It feels unhealthy.
Well, that's interesting because I just have this open here. It's in the 28, section 28. Mm-hmm. He has only one thing to consider in performing any action, he being just any person.
Right.
That is whether they are acting rightly or wrongly, like a good person or a bad one. Right.
But the funny thing is, I don't think of good people and bad people.
But it's, this is why he talks about his oracle, though.
Right.
Because it's this idea that you sort of do know, though, right? And here's where he's talking about his oracle in section 31D. It began in my early childhood, a sort of voice which comes to me, and when it comes, it always dissuades me from what I'm proposing to do and never urges me on, right? And it's this idea that we all, I think, do know when we're acting in accordance with whatever that voice is in our head.
I think that's risky, though, because, maybe... Here's where I struggle with it, though, because I know a lot of people who believe things, almost everybody I know, believes things that I think are really, really bad. Taxation, for example. I don't know almost anybody who agrees with me that taxation is plain out theft and a terrible
these are
thing.
very higher order
I think it's a really
things.
bad thing that's akin to slavery. But it's such a common belief of people I know and like and love that I don't actually think that they're bad people.
Well, and I would argue that that's a very higher order thing. And I guess maybe that's the point, is like it's talking because they're not the one that are implementing the taxation too.
Right, but I also know people who think that lying isn't always bad, and I don't know what I think on that. And I don't think they're bad people or people who believe in all sorts of like communistic things and stuff that I think is very negative, that if they had their way and they implemented it, the world would be a much worse place. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that they are bad people, I guess. I think it's similar to what you were saying before about how everybody's conscience is sort of made up of a whole bunch of experiences and things they've read and things they've learned and things that have been told to them and blah, 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 this whole thing. And so this is where I don't know that I'm right, and this is where I don't know that I don't think I have the ability to decide if somebody is a bad person or not.
It's a good question, though, because it's like I was going to make this point, though, is that, and again, I think the taxation point's a tricky one because there's a lot of layers to that I think
I just bring it up because it's obvious that I'm one of the few people in
I understand that. Yes.
Social circles.
No, I know that.
Agree.
But I guess what I'm saying is talking about more primary actions that people are doing. And that's my point, is like they're not doing the taxation, right? They're sort of having to go along with it. So you'd more want to talk about who's the person that's actually collecting the tax, and is the guilt, do they feel any sort of guilt from that? And my point is, whether or not it's conscious, there are manifestations of anxiety that we have that anybody that's in the medical field will know, and we probably call them iatrogenic or idiopathic. We call them idiopathic, not iatrogenic.
What does that mean? I don't know either word.
Iatrogenic would be that it's caused by like the doctors giving some prescription, and then it's a result of a treatment, some sort of disorder. So I misspoke. I didn't mean to say iatrogenic. I meant to say idiopathic, which is the idea that we don't know what the cause of...
Maybe I missed the beginning. What are we saying is a result?
I'm saying that there's a lot of diseases. People will come in with diseases with no seeming understanding of what's causing it.
Right.
And I wonder, to a limit, I'm not saying everything is this.
I see.
But I'm saying I wonder...
Is caused by...
No, actually, I'm saying probably the autistic person has the least amount of this because, again, I think part of autism is almost just not being able to hold your tongue, and you just you're speaking your mind all the time.
Okay.
So you're being actually in many ways more honest than most people. It's the idea of like inflammatory bowel disease, for instance, which is rampant, right? And again, there's a lot of ideas of what could be causing this. But it's just, I definitely feel the more stressed I get, it's manifested in my stomach. And is that a cause of me acting dishonestly, or is it just a cause of stress, or can it not be both, etc.? And it's this whole, this isn't anything unknown. It's the idea that, people say this all the time, like whether or not, somebody actually gets found out for some horrible thing that they do, they will face judgment of some kind because their body will not let them live with it. And I think that we all do have these little sort of manifestations when we don't act in accordance with the voice. Now, I agree the voice in our head isn't necessarily uniform. Like, we have no way of really knowing that. But it's an interesting question of whether it's not. Because it's like you bring up even Jeffrey Dahmer, and who was a serial killer who was horrible, but he was not living a very happy life, and also he was constantly trying to drink himself into a stupor. And you have to wonder, with everybody that sort of drinks themselves into stupor, when they're trying, what are you doing when you get drunk? Is you're turning off that voice in many senses. And so this is my point too, is that we use a lot of things to also just shut that voice out. So anyway, it's a very complicated question, is I guess what I'm getting at. I threw a lot out there. I'm not saying that IBS is caused by this, but it certainly seems to have some degree to be caused by anxiety and whatnot. And we also just don't really understand it. And it's a very common thing in our society right now.
Yeah. So wait, what were those two words?
Idiopathic, which is the idea, which is what I was really getting at, is the idea that, people come in with diseases that we can't understand.
So would the statement that autism is caused by vaccines or something? I don't believe that. Would that be an example of that?
No.
Okay.
Well, saying that it was no, because you're saying that it's caused by something. That would be iatrogenic, if that's actually true.
Okay,
because
that was one of the words you used, right?
Yes, yes. Okay. The second word was iatrogenic, which is
the first one is that we don't know what causes it.
Exactly.
It's just, it's happening and we don't know why.
Yes, I'm not saying it is iatrogenic.
So that's like most stuff.
Idiopathic.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
But I would also argue lots of stuff is actually probably iatrogenic too, because everybody's on such big just concoctions of cocktails that it's like we don't know how, like when you do a study right on an animal, you're testing like in very controlled settings, and of course, yes, everything is run under clinical trials, but in reality people are on 4 or 5 drugs, vitamins, supplements, dietary differences. Right. It's very complicated, and so we have obviously some understanding of drug interactions, especially the very important ones, but there's a lot of just insidious drug interactions that make me wonder. That's all I'll say.
That's all you'll say?
Yeah.
Nice. Okay.
I'm not ready to become my full Socratic form yet.
Nice. Well, that's cool.
Let's hope.
Well, I said that's cool.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, I don't know. I'm not trying to drink any hemlock anytime soon. You know what I'm saying?
You know what I'm saying. Yeah. All right. So what else? What else is interesting about it? I feel like I hit all the stuff I was trying to hit.
Yeah. I mean, the oligarchy replacing democracy point, I thought that was interesting, but we talked about that. I thought it was interesting that he was a councilman at one point, and I talked about that, but, during the rule of the 30, the tyrannical 30, as there's sometimes called, he was, and this was just an example of how he will still, despite outside pressure, he'll still sort of work to what he thinks is right. And I think his fundamental point about corrupting the youth and corrupting people in general is that he has just been on this quest, this private quest, as he says, to go and quiz people about their wisdom, essentially, as annoying as it might sound. Yeah. And he's just saying, people, the youth just followed me because it was entertaining, essentially, but I've never tried to teach them. They just hang around me.
They're just taught by me. Sorry.
Yeah. No, but he's saying I haven't ever explicitly taught them, since I've never promised or impaired any teaching to anybody, and if anyone asserts that he has ever learned or heard from me privately anything which was not open to everyone else, you may be quite sure that he is not telling the truth. So that's the idea that and you see this in his dialogues. Most of his dialogues, there's like more than just one person there.
Right.
It's generally.
I also get the sense he could just be lying.
Oh yeah, of course.
He could just be like completely bullshitting.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and again, Plato was obviously very biased here. He liked Socrates. But yeah, I have this as Socrates' chief goal. I tried to persuade each one of you not to think more of practical advantages than of his mental and moral well-being, or in general to think more of advantage than of well-being in the case of the state or of anything else. So basically, just going back to that idea of doing good. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I thought you probably would find it interesting because he is very much a statist.
Right.
How do you feel about that?
I hadn't really thought about that.
Yeah, because I mean, his whole thing too is like, we didn't read this, but in Phaedo, however you pronounce it, which is where they actually document Socrates' death. He is, they try to. They're like, hey man, we can get you out of here. We'll bribe the guards, and he's like, no. No. I'm gonna die, damn it.
Yeah.
And so and one of his things is it's like, I'm a lawful person. It is the duty of any lawful person to follow the laws or persuade people that the laws are not right. Mm-hmm. What do you think of that?
I mean, I don't agree, but I think it's a wild stance. It's one of those things that it feels very Jesus-y again to me. Mm-hmm. It's one of those things where it almost doesn't feel like a real person. Mm-hmm. It feels like he's an archetype, signaling some ultimate paragon of virtue.
Definitely. I think, we are very jaded in the modern world because it's like nobody, I feel like, can really be held up to this sort of supreme ideal anymore because we know so much about everybody.
But I think that's the idea of Jesus also, that it's impossible for any human to be held to that standard. That's why only God can do it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, do you know the background of Mary?
Let me guess. She had a lot of sex.
I don't know. People are saying. Yeah, no, exactly. Whatever. The cast the first stone thing,
Yep.
Yeah, no, but I agree. I
don't agree with... My principle with respect to laws is that I at least somewhat align with the basis that laws should be there to uphold the rights of citizens, first and foremost. And so any laws that are cutting against the rights of citizens are not actually, quote, lawful in a true sense. Mm-hmm. So like speed limits and stuff like that. Like arbitrary laws that have a lot more to do with the bureaucracy of the state and people controlling one another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, and this is where it gets difficult in practice, right?
Right.
I would say. But, yeah. I mean, yeah. And again, it's like sort of touching back on our anarchy conversations. It's interesting, too, because whether or not you agree with democracy or whatever, Athens especially during Socrates' time, was sort of at one of its cultural heights. I mean, obviously, when Plato was living and Aristotle, that was also good. But slowly, Athens was they were not the same power that they were, right? And it's just interesting that you do see, again, in a society that becomes more egalitarian and free, ultimately, there's some barbaric neighbor, Sparta, that comes in, and just
Dude,
and
the
ruins
Spartans
it.
are going to be so mad at you.
Dude, yeah, I know. But, whatever you want to call them, or you want to call it like Rome and the barbarian, like Goth, right?
Right.
Or the
What does
Visigoths.
the word barbarian mean? Where does that come from?
I think it comes from them. I mean, because they're the Greeks. Basically, anybody that wasn't Greek was barbarian in the Greek
But what is barbarian, like barbar, like Barbary Coast?
Oh, yeah, I don't know if that's the etymology.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Who are the barbarians?
Yeah. I don't know. But I guess that's what I'm saying, though, is with the anarchy conversations, it's like I kind of feel and agree that anarchism is kind of an ideal in that it will maximize people's freedom, individual freedom.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like the reason people have organized in the larger and larger states is because the larger the state you can organize, the more powerful you'll be to defend against an outside aggressor.
Right.
Yeah. So it seems to me for anarchy to work, everybody would need to be anarchist, I guess is the point.
Probably.
Yeah.
That sounds close to right, at least.
Nice. Who are the barbarians? Did you?
Yeah. I looked it up. I think I actually learned this in a European history class, but it's just a word that meant non-Roman, non-Greek people. Right. It was like a slur. It's like a racial slur, mostly referring to the Germanic people in the north.
Oh yeah.
Because I guess they said that they used to make fun of them because like they say bar 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 bar, like they're making fun of their accent.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, no, I mean exactly. I mean, and I think it was the Greeks. I thought they were the ones that started it, and then the Romans, obviously, once they because I mean you would say the Romans were sort of relatively uncivilized at this stage. Mm-hmm. They were still an empire, but they weren't, whatever.
Right. Well, it's not even a word that's that old. It's from the late 14th century.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, but I mean, they again, and this is why, are we talking about the actual word barbarian, or are we talking about...
Yeah, the actual word barbarian.
Yeah, because Greeks, again, make reference to barbarians in Plato's writings even, as just anybody... like in Macedonia, for instance, or in, the Balkans.
Right. I wonder what the word is in Greek.
Yeah, I don't know.
I found a cool translation that every other page is the Greek.
Oh, interesting.
Of the apology, but I mean, I can't read it. So.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, now with that attitude.
I can do it.
Yeah. Yeah, so what do you want to read next? Do you want to read... I mean, I think we've pretty much exhausted this, right?
Yeah.
It's not too complicated, and I think the main thing I wanted to sort of communicate to the world was that idea of, assume that you don't know anything.
Yeah, do it.
Yeah. And, so we could
also engage more on Reddit, please.
Oh.
Yeah.
Just everybody?
Yeah, to everybody.
Yeah. You don't like the lurkers?
Well, I didn't have much engagement this week. So.
Well, yeah, your question wasn't very controversial.
I couldn't think of a controversial question.
No, and I didn't think... I was honestly wondering if last episode would be one... Because it did, like I was saying, the analytics were okay without actually pushing anything. So, yeah. But, yeah, I don't know. We can think of something for this one. I don't know, like...
This one will be easier.
Yeah.
I already have ideas. It's fine.
Yeah, because you were also, like, posting in, I feel like, less controversial subreddits. Like, they were, like,
true.
Music Theory.
I did get a 90-day ban from one of the subreddits.
Was it the history one?
No, it was, like, music. This is our music. Talk music. Music conversations. I don't know, something like that. It's because they don't allow self-promotion.
Oh, I see. Well, that's okay. Who cares? That's funny. They banned you.
Yeah. So what should we do next? Exactly.
Maybe like Plato's Republic, I was thinking, or there's one where he talks about actually words. I'd have to go back and remember.
That sounds fun.
Yeah. It's kind of a long one if I remember, though. But he talks about etymology and stuff like that and how important it is. Mm-hmm. And it makes you kind of wonder about English and stuff like that. It makes you think about where these sounds, the phonemes, actually come from and what the meaning behind them is and how it affects our perception of the world and maybe also explains our perception of the world. But potentially, I think the Republic would be a good one to go to next.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So obviously, we probably shouldn't read all the books. I was actually thinking, I think he talks about, if we want to do like The Cave, that's in, I think, book 7.
Just do the hits.
Oh, yeah, if we want to do Justice, that's the first book.
I think Justice is a good one.
Yeah.
Because that word gets tossed around a lot these days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we could do that. I think he talks about property in the second one a little bit.
Property.
Yeah. So it's like we can do what we can say is we'll do the first book definitely, and then if you want to read more, because I'll probably read more at the holidays. So
sure.
Yeah. Why?
Yeah. I mean, I probably won't read anything this week. Yeah.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
Do you have a lot of gigs, or are you?
No, I'm flying up to Wisconsin tomorrow.
Oh, that's right. And
I've been sick. I had to cancel my gigs this last weekend.
Man. Yeah,
I still have a sore throat. It's crazy.
Really? Man.
I don't know what it is.
Rhinovirus.
Yeah,
probably.
maybe.
Yeah.
Cool.
Something's going around. My dad's been sick for a while, too.
Oh, dang.
Yeah. Hey, he's better, too, though. Anyway.
That's good.
TMI, you know?
Yeah, right. All right. Well, I think we did it.
I do, too. Yeah. Any Reddit discussions? I guess we...
I mean, just one person commented. The one thing we didn't talk about last week, which we should have, since we were talking about famous arrangements and stuff, was Ravel.
Yeah, I saw that comment, actually. That was a good comment. I think
it's a really good comment. We didn't, the pictures at an exhibition is
Do you want to explain the context of it? You want to explain the context?
Oh, yeah. So last week we were talking about music arranging, and Ravel is known for a famous orchestration of Mussorgsky's Pictures at an Exhibition, which is originally a cycle of pieces for piano, and Ravel orchestrated it out for full orchestra. And one thing, we didn't really talk about orchestration as a form of transmission other than Stokowski. We did, I guess, with Stokowski and Bach's Toccata and Fugue. But what's interesting about Ravel's version is the orchestra version is probably more famous than Mussorgsky's original version. And they're kind of seen as equally artistically valid versions of the same piece.
Right. Yeah, no, I thought that was a great point that person brought up.
Yep.
Yeah. Or, to a modern context, you think of Mad World by Tears for Fears.
Oh, yeah.
But
covers. We kind of talked about covers with respect to copyright, but not as a practice.
I kept steel-arming the conversation back to that or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah.
All right.
I think. All right.
Well, see ya. Goodbye.
See ya.